Hello, everyone. This is Tamara Shia Hoffman with USAID's Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation, and thanks to all of you for joining us for this webinar series during Peace Exchange's Gender and Conflict campaign. We launched our campaign on September 21st on International Day of Peace with a webinar co-hosted by our good friends at the United States Institute of Peace. And really the purpose of this campaign is to help practitioners better understand how conflict affects men and women and boys and girls differently, which is really, really essential to effective conflict-sensitive programming. So we're so thrilled to continue this month with our theme, our sub-theme with gender and conflict, which is on highlighting masculinities, which is, of course, the idea that men are expected to behave in a certain setting. And so we know oftentimes that when people think about gender, oftentimes they don't think about men and boys, but they are so key to this equation. And so we wanted to make sure that we highlighted masculinities very prominently. And so we're so thrilled today to be hearing from Natko Geres, who is a program officer at Promundo. And Promundo is one of USAID's wonderful implementing partners. They're a global leader in promoting gender justice and preventing violence by engaging men and boys to really be part of the solution by also partnering with women and girls. And their programs and advocacy efforts are based on really rigorous research. And so we're just thrilled to have Natko here with us today. Natko himself focuses on research related to post-conflict and violence as it relates to men and boys. And he's done some amazing work in Kinshasa, as well as engaging in the International Men and Gender Equality Survey in the Middle East and North Africa and Afghanistan. But he's also worked with the United States Institute of Peace in Afghanistan. He's super, super impressive. He also, in addition to all of his wonderful work on gender issues, he's also a licensed medical doctor, and he's currently finalizing his Master's in Public Health and his PhD in the field of masculinity and men's health at the University of Zagreb School of Medicine. And his bio is incredibly long, so I won't go through all the other many, many impressive things. But Natko, we're so thrilled to have you talk today about masculinities. And so just for everyone on the line, Natko is going to present for about 20-25 minutes, and then we're going to open up the webinar for questions and answers. So just type your questions in the question box, and if you're able to answer all of your questions, definitely go to Peace Exchange's webinar page, and we'll find a time where Natko can respond afterwards. So with that, Natko, I invite you to present, and thanks again for your willingness to speak to us today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this great honor to speak at the webinar. So also thank you for a great introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about a specific aspect of Promundo's work in post-conflict countries, where we work on transforming negative gender stereotypes around negative gender norms around masculinity with aim of achieving gender justice and general well-being of men, women, children, and communities in whole, and in that way contributing to peace and prevention of conflict. In today's presentation, I'm first going to try to present how we engage men specifically and why we engage men specifically in peace building. We're going to talk about how masculinity is affected by conflict and peace building and vice versa, or better to say how we can work on transforming negative gender norms around masculinity to achieve peace, and show concrete examples of Promundo's programs working in conflict, post-conflict, and high urban violence settings. Although, Tamara, thank you, you've given a great introduction to Promundo. I just want to give a short overview of Promundo as an organization. So Promundo's existed so far or almost 20 years. It was founded in '97 in Rio de Janeiro. First work was done with young men in favelas, so basically working with young men to understand that there are different ways of showing one's manhood and different ways of being men rather than joining violent groups. And since then, it has worked in more than 60 countries around the world. At the moment, we're partnering and providing technical support and implementing research and programming in more than 20 countries. We are primarily a research organization trying to provide evidence that would inform programs to engage men in reaching gender equality. So basically creating, testing, evaluating, and then upscaling programs and trying to work on through advocacy to institutionalize them in cooperation with governments and different institutions. We work from out of 4 offices. First office was founded in Brazil. We also have an office in Washington, D.C., in Goma, in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Portugal. So our approach is based on understanding that as Tamara, you said in your introduction, men and boys are also enmeshed in gender norms. So very often gender equality and in general talk about gender or topics around gender are perceived as only a women's issue, but men and boys are as much influenced by gender norms as women, and gender norms form and in a way dictate their lives, leading in many aspects to negative consequences. So some social norms around masculinity can be harmful to not only women and girls, but also to men and boys. So through our work, we try to analyze social norms around masculinity and transform those aspects of masculinity into more positive ways of how men can live their lives. We also understand that gender intersects with different power system, or better to say, patriarchy is one of the power system that very much intersects with other power systems. And while patriarchy provides or puts men into position of greater power or dominance over women, it does not provide men in defense from, or better to say, men are very much exposed to all the other different aspects of power systems, and also patriarchy as a power system itself is harmful for men. So looking at the numbers to put a little bit of a context to what I've just said on how gender norms around masculinity can be harmful for men, we can see that looking at homicides, deaths in conflicts, and suicides, majority of victims are men. So transforming negative norms around masculinity can definitely benefit not only women, children, but also men themselves. So looking at these numbers, we work on, of course, reducing the harm that is caused by negative social norms of masculinity, understanding that by reducing these numbers, we will simply reduce the number of people who are influenced harmfully by gender norms and not equal the numbers between men and women, so to say. Before starting to talk about the topic of today's seminar, so before diving more deeply into the discussion about masculinity and the impact of conflict on it, I would just give overview of research that Promundo has conducted so far, directly or in partnership for providing technical assistance in more than 36 countries, around the world, interviewing more than 50,000 men and women, which is called International Men and Gender Equality Survey, which is probably the biggest base of evidence on lives, perspectives, contexts of and relations of men in relation to gender and masculinity. And I will, in the next few slides, present some of the findings of the images that was implemented in conflict, post-conflict, and urban violence settings, such as DRC, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Croatia. So, looking at the results of images research that was implemented in Bosnia in 2012, and we probably all know that Bosnia has suffered greatly war in majority of 90s. We see that almost 25% of men directly participated in war. And when we think of men in war, we most often think of men as active participants of war. But then when we look at other numbers, we also see that almost half of the men experienced death of a family member in war, or needed to leave their home or migrate because of the war. They were wounded or injured in the war, or witnessed violence of their family, of people in their communities. Going to results of images research implemented in Eastern DRC in 2012, again, very similar findings. So we see high percentage of men who witnessed war in conflict, who were forced to leave school or were displaced because of war, who had their family members killed during the conflict and war. I'm giving this data, and I think by now you understand, just to emphasize how although men are, when thinking of war, perceived very often as active participants, we very often forget how men are also victims of war. Looking at some other data about perceptions of both men and women about impact of war on them, we see that, for instance, majority of both men and women say that war has made them a bad person, that they lost reputation before the family, that they feel guilty for surviving when the rest of the family died, or that they were influenced on an emotional level, losing the capacity to love or care for the others. Again, showing some of the results from images implemented in Eastern DRC in 2012, and there is a screenshot of the report which is downloadable on Promundo's website, promundoglobal.org. We see that 73% of men reported feeling ashamed to face their families because they cannot provide basic financial needs. Economic disparity, and if we think of pillars of traditional masculinity being that man needs to provide, man needs to defend, man needs to dominate, we can already start understanding how conflict, besides engaging men as active participants and combatants, influences also men's perception of themselves and their perception of their value as men. We see that there is a high percentage of women who reported experiencing sexual violence, but also that there is a high percentage, not so high of course, but there we forget that men are also victims of sexual violence. And then again, going back to the traditional pillars patriarchal understanding of what it means to be a man. We see this 43% of men agreeing that men should reject his wife if she is raped, understanding how men again live their lives in very narrow boxes, and understanding of what it means to be a man, understanding how the relations between men and women should basically how men and women should interact, and how women are in perception of patriarchal understanding of men objectified and treated, seen or understood as ownership of men. Going to some of the results from images implemented even earlier in Rwanda, we see that 80% of men and women witnessed or experienced violence of some kind during genocide. But what is very interesting is that those men who witnessed or experienced violence during genocide were 50% more likely to have used violence against a female sexual partner. So throughout this presentation, we're also going to try to understand why this happens and how conflict is related to the increase of gender-based violence, which is proven again and again. So, key point, as I said, is that although we very often thinking about men's role in conflict, understand men as perpetrators of violence and carriers of violence in conflict, we often forget that men are also witnesses of violence and victims of violence, and that men can and should be seen as also agents of change that can bring peace and stop conflict. So, again, talking about the impact of conflict and generally post-conflict environment on lives of men, thinking about men who are involved in direct war activities, let's try to understand how masculinity is instrumentalized in order for men to participate in war. So especially unemployed boys and men, especially young men, are instrumentalized in this way through a provision of violent and pro-conflict male role models. We can understand that in the environment of general dispowerment, having a gun, being part of armed group, offers status, sex, income, and power. And looking at all of this, we can understand that how challenging is for men to then return to their civilian lives, in which they lose the power given through the association with violent groups during the war. So the challenge is in unlearning the violence that men are pushed toward in the times of war. Looking at the impact of conflict on masculinity on men in on a more general level, as I said, war and conflict brings economic disparity, so men are not able to provide for their families. Also from the data earlier on in the presentation, we saw how men are not able to defend their families. And also thinking about the situation of war and conflict, where often men are not able to work, or there is a switch of roles. We can understand how this switch in gender roles due to instability and inability to provide leads to men losing sense of domination and authority, and in a way losing their ground under their feet, because their perception of what it means to be a man was built through a box of patriarchal understanding of what it means to be a man, built on values that we try to transform through our programming. So through our programming, we aim to transform the underlying cause that then lay through conflict and through the environment associated with conflict and post-conflict leads to negative trends as a consequence of these social norms. So how to work with men on peace building by transforming negative gender roles around masculinity. So we first need to understand that men are also victims of war and help them heal from the trauma. We need to understand that many men want to unlearn violence, but are simply lack the skills or lack the support, or are expected in an environment of conflict and post-conflict to act violently and live their lives violently. So we have to believe that men can, and if provided a chance, will unlearn violence through positive approach to changing norms around masculinity. Working with men to be more connected with their immediate and extended families can be also achieved by providing positive male role models. So not all men are violent, and we have to assure that men who are not violent, who can provide positive role modeling, are supported into influencing other men around themselves and are portrayed as a positive and right way of what it means to be a man. And through all this what I've just mentioned, we can achieve men understanding that their masculine identity is much greater than the need to align with the violent forms of masculinity. Through connection with their families, people around them, through building communities, through achieving peace, and through denying violence and war. So, as we say, as I said, working on peace building is entailed by working with men to understand that positive self-identity is not connected to their access to high status, income, power associated with being part of the violent groups, but rather is connected to restoring peace, rebuilding society, and preventing conflict. As earlier mentioned, treating the underlying causes of inequality, transforming the negative social norms around masculinity, and transforming the patriarchal understanding of what it means to be a man is a venue to prevent conflict, to build communities, to prevent violence, and to prevent future conflict. And in designing and thinking about programs that work on building peace, we need to look at it through gender transformative lens and use gender transformative approach in peace building, which is not always the case. What works in fragile settings? So in fragile settings, we need to first work on positive local practices. So for if we are working with youth on peace building, we need to create our approach in a way that it's youth friendly, that it's appealing to youth. If we are working with communities in which elders have a strong influence, we need to work with those influential men on providing positive models of masculinity. If caregiving is associated with men's understanding of fulfilling their roles as men, and this is so much connected to gender equality, then this is a good venue and good access point to engage men in achieving gender transformation that leads to gender equality, that leads to peace and stability. We need to identify the voices of resistance and support them. So men are not generally violent. We mustn't perceive men as violent beings, but rather as beings which are pushed into violence through social expectations, and those who manage to resist need to be supported. We need to help men find new identities and new alternative ways to relate to women, other men and children in order to create peace at home by creating a place to share trauma, creating space for them to express themselves, assuring positive peer groups in which the transfer of positive models can be achieved. In multiple evaluations, we have seen that programs that question what it means to be a man as a central approach, that programs that have longer duration, so invest in longer time period into men and their change, are successful in achieving the change. Programs that work with men on transforming negative social norms around masculinity, in that way achieving peace, need to be composed out of multiple components in a way that we don't simply work with men, but also work with men as part of a group, work with men as a relational being, so including families in working with men and including the surrounding, including women, children, and of course creating a supportive environment that then can enable men that they live the life of change achieved through the programs. And of course, we need to provide space for men to testify on the change and be activists in their community. So to achieve that, we need a creative, supportive environment, which will then enable the transfer of the change to other men. Now I will just give an overview of a program that Promundo has been running since 2012, basically since the images research was implemented in Eastern DRC, called The Living Peace. It's a program that is still active and is being at the moment funded by the Dutch government in area of Eastern DRC, more specifically in the area of Goma and Sake and around that area. So far, our associate partners, the Living Peace Institute, in collaboration with their partners, have worked with more than 5,000 men, first helping them to heal from the trauma, helping them strengthen their positive coping strategy, rebuilding social and partner relations, engaging men who resist violence as positive role models, and then supporting those men that achieve that change to influence the communities around them through activism and mentorship. Living Peace program is becoming very much seen and understood as a very successful approach, because it includes both trauma-informed approach, which enables men to heal from the trauma and only then works with men to take accountability for the violence that men do, change the understanding of what it means to be a man, testify on the change, and then reach out to other men around them, being in military, being in police academy, or in the communities. What we see as evidence of the impact of Living Peace program is that men that have been involved in this kind of programming have better management of problems at home. They deal with stress better, they reach out to their peers better, they negotiate, they communicate with their partners more easily and without violence. We can see that men drink less and abuse alcohol less, that they control their frustration and aggression better, and also share power with their wives in a way that they jointly make decisions about income in their families, which of course increases the positive outcomes for their children in sense of schooling, but also children are impacted in positive way by general atmosphere of peace at home. Also, what we see is that this approach contributes to better health conditions of men. Men gain weight, men have better perception of their own health and are more satisfied with their lives. Showing another program is a program that I was involved with since 2006 for almost 10 years until I passed to went to Promundo in 2015. So since 2016, Promundo has, in cooperation with local partners and Care International, worked with more than 30,000 young men in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, and Kosovo, in cooperation with Care International, again transforming the understanding of what it means to be a man and changing the perception and ideas about so-called Balkan manhood, but more specifically focusing on deconstructing the militaristic versions of manhood, which are so instrumentalized and used in the environment of post-conflict, such as these countries are thinking about the conflict in the 90s. In doing so, we worked with ministries, with the police, with youth offenders facilities, with sport clubs, with through theater, through youth activism, and really through several impact evaluations shown change through our programming, connecting young men from countries that used to be in war and basically supporting them into being agents of change. This is a program based on Program H methodology from Promundo, which is now being also adopted in Lebanon as Program Ra, and we expect that our partners in Lebanon, Abad, will do wonders using this program also in Lebanon, but also wider in the whole Middle East and North Africa region. And finally, to wrap up, so going back to the beginning, how transforming gender norms around masculinity can influence and contribute to peace. So working with men on prevention of violence, we not only prevent the violence that these men do, but also prevent violence of future generations, because men who were witnesses or had male role models who were violent are themselves also more likely to be violent. So by transforming masculinity, we achieve long-term peace and reconstruct society in post-conflict environment. But we must not forget that this is never enough if we in parallel do not create conditions in which men can live their lives as non-violent, productive members of the society. So, of course, every conflict and war is a tragedy, but through positive approach to post-conflict, we can, in a way, have a chance to grow as a society after conflict. Finally, I'm at this moment, it's already tomorrow in Kabul. I'm at this moment in Kabul, where Promundo is implementing International Men and Gender Equality Survey, and we hope that we would inform concrete programming working with men on achieving gender equality and through it also achieving peace. In cooperation with our friends from United States Institute of Peace, we have so far trained 60 young agents who, in a very unstable and conflict atmosphere, are working as positive male role models to change the society in a way that they demonstrate how men should and need to demonstrate through their own lives peace and stability. Okay, so that's basically this part of the session. I would now turn to participant questions.
Natko, Thank you so much for that presentation and for joining us from Afghanistan. I know it's getting pretty late there. We have several questions, and I would encourage folks that are on the webinar to input your questions in the question box. The first question, Natko, you talked about working with men and boys in several different areas. We're interested to know if you've worked with men and boys who have been perpetrators of violence or gender equality, and if so, how you've worked to reintegrate them into society.
Well, so as I mentioned, through the Young Men Initiative program in the Balkans, in countries of former Yugoslavia, we've not only done primary prevention for working with young men in schools or youth centers, but also work with young men in youth offenders facilities, and it has been shown as a positive approach to basically preventing future violence and preventing recidivity of violence. One of the components of the programs working with the police was named the best primary prevention approach in collaboration with the police in Europe. So although we focus our work on prevention, of course, we cooperate with organizations working with the perpetrator themselves and understand that as is prevention in working with men, as is work on women's empowerment, as is work with institutions and creating and building capacities, working with the perpetrators is also a crucial component to achieving peace. But as I said, I mean, Living Peace itself has worked with former combatants, former child soldiers, so we need to understand that violence is so much part of what it means to be a man, and although our programs are not focused on in majority on perpetrators of violence, again, very often men through their lives go from the positions of perpetrators to the positions of witnesses or victims of violence. What I feel very important is to say that we never deny accountability for violence. So although we work with men on understanding and understanding how social factors contribute to violence, we never provide alibi for violence. So working with men is also taking accountability for your own violence, but also for violence of men around you. So only, I would say that 6 to 7 out of 10 men are not violent, and we need to assure that these non-violent men don't remain silent but influence those men around them that do commit violence. And through working, we assure that we create peer groups in which there is this interaction between positive male role models and those men that are very supportive of violence. But our programs are basically preventive and deconstructing social norms. They are not, in its essence, programs working with perpetrators. Okay, does that answer?
That. And you talked a little bit about accountability. We have a question from Ben Atherton Zeman, who wants to know how specifically do you ensure that these men and boys are accountable to women and feminist women's organizations in these.
I'm sorry, I just heard the first part of the question, so I just heard the part on how we assure that men...
You talked a little bit about accountability, but we have a question from Ben Atherton Zeman who wants to know how specifically do you ensure that men and boys are accountable to women in these communities?
So thank you, thank you for that question. We work in a way that we understand the work with men to understand, first of all, what is violence, understanding that violence is not part of what it means to be a man, or not a component of biological component of what it means to be a man, although very often through our lives we will hear you know, boys need to be like that, or you know, they need to fight sometimes, or boys are like that. So boys are raised in a way that violence is acceptable and is part of being a man. So first step is denying that approach and understanding that violence is not part of what it means to be a man, but that violence is a behavior. And as much as violence is promoted and as a model of what it means to be a man, we assure that men first understand that it is a choice to be violent, and by understanding that it is a choice, we then work with men to take accountability for their actions, and understand that every time that they use violence or approve violence, that they are doing that not because they were pushed into violence, or not because somebody else is to blame, or that's part of what it means biologically to be a man, but rather because it's their own choice. It's their own choice to do harm to themselves, to people around them, and this is the way to achieve this accountability. So first step would be understanding what violence is, this disconnecting violence from men, and then disconnecting violence from men as an integral part of men, and then working on accountability for their actions. Yeah, does that answer,
We
Ben?
have time for, I think, 3 more questions. We'll try to squeeze these in. This one is from Larissa Schneider. She wants to know if Promundo has worked in high-risk countries that aren't necessarily in war but are violent, like the Caribbean, and if so, if you could speak about that.
Well, as I said, I mean, Promundo started its work by working in favelas. Just recently, Promundo has launched images that, besides the standard set of questions that all of the images questionnaires have, also includes part of impact of high urban violence settings on masculinity, again, trying to even more improve and increased understanding of impact of high urban violence settings on lives of men. Concretely, our colleagues from Brazilian office work a lot with the police and with the police in Rio de Janeiro. That's just one of the examples. So the answer is yes. It's very hard to make the distinction in a violent setting. It's hard to make a distinction of what is more violent or less violent environment, or just because some environment is nominally not in war conflict, that does not mean that it's not full of violence, and that violence is not overwhelmingly a part of its community's members. I'll just give an example. Now, being in Afghanistan, European Union has last year made a decision that Afghanistan is not at war, so it will not receive refugees from Afghanistan, where thousands of men and women were left stranded on the borders. Does that mean that this is not a violent environment? So we work with men, we work with humans, with communities, and it's not always easy to categorize these communities. But first of all, we see men, women, humans, and then understanding their context. As for Caribbean, I will my mail is, I think, shared on, or the contact of the organization is shared, so there are resources on our work. I don't know now exactly, but I'm happy to follow up on the question on the work in Caribbean. I know there are plans for working in the Caribbean at the moment, but I'll need to follow up on that question with a more concrete answer. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks for that. So we have two more quick questions. This one's from Dawson Wells. When you are doing a 6 to 9 month program, how do you recruit the program participants?
Thank you. That's a really good. I mean, all of the questions are really good, and I really enjoy this opportunity to answer the questions. So, you know, very often when I was working with the schools, then the pedagogues would ask us, "Well, do you want us to recruit problematic young men?" And then we would say, "There is no such thing as problematic young men. This is a label, and if you label a person as being a problematic, they will really live their lives as being problematic." We can understand that some men are facing more challenges or are doing harm to themselves or the people around them. So our approach would be always to have a group of peers where influence of positive role models can be achieved toward those in need, those in greater need. So I would say that we do not recruit in a way that we say, okay, this is a workshop for men who are violent, but rather in collaboration with the communities, with the schools, try to, with them, besides the general population, understand who are those men who really need this programming, and then try to do our best to involve them as well. Thank you.
Okay, and last question is from Usha Vatsia. She thanks you for your presentation, and she said that she's actually led a team assessment for care in the Balkans that laid the foundation of the work that you just shared. So you guys have mutual connections. But she wants to know if you can share examples of how you work with the community members to support young men in changing their behavior.
Well, I'll go back to the example of what is the closest to me, the example of work in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, and from recently Albania. We've developed a training module for school experts, and they went through educational cycle, a capacity building cycle for working with young men using gender transformative work. We worked with we did expert education or lifelong education also for different profiles of experts. We engage with school teachers, with sport trainers, with NGOs and youth workers. We worked with the media. So there are, in each of the community where we work with men or young men or boys, we first need to understand what is the kind of network of influences, and make sure that we don't miss those influences, and then that besides working with boys and men, in parallel we put as much effort also in working with structures surrounding or stakeholders surrounding boys and men. Our partners through the Living Peace program in the Eastern DRC implement Living Peace methodology in Police Academy in Bukavu. So this is a great example how this approach is institutionalized, and working with men in Police Academy in two lanes. So in one lane being these police officers are professionals who will be, in a way, role models, who will be dealing with the situations, who will need to solve violence or be in position to cause violence. So this is on a professional aspect, but also working with these police officers as men, as people who were enmeshed in gender norms and themselves were led to have certain way of understanding what it means to be a man. So basically, I would give a suggestion first to understand who is there in the community, how to engage with the community in whole, how to influence men and build structures around men, and then create approaches for doing exactly that, whether these are teachers, religious leaders, elders, police officers, pedagogues, media, or just health workers. So in Brazil, our colleagues are doing wonderful work with Ministry of Health, training medical experts in providing training for men on prenatal and early childhood care, which is a fantastic venue to achieving gender equality. So there are many examples, and I'm happy to share some of the different examples, but also, again, I would turn to promundoglobal.org, and there we have a great library of resources, and just scrolling through that library, you can see different examples of approaches to basically build the structures and assure environmental support to the change of man. Thank you.
Natko, I want to thank you so much for your time and just for sharing from your heart and all the wonderful research that you're doing, and also for staying up in the wee hours of Afghanistan's morning just to be with us and to share the wonderful work you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing with us. We know we got a lot of questions today, and so we will post any unanswered questions to Peace Exchange's webinar page, and Natko will answer those in the coming weeks. So thanks to all of you for joining us for the webinar. Again, if your friends weren't able to join us, this was recorded and we will post it on our webinar page. And join us next month, where we will continue to highlight our gender and conflict resources and tools and training materials. And our next webinar will be November 9th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we'll highlight USAID's gender and conflict training. So thanks again to all of you, and a special thanks to Natko for your time, and keep up the wonderful work. Thanks again.
Thanks everybody for joining. It's been a really honor and pleasure.